Okay, let's get started. Thank you guys for coming. Really appreciate your time today. I know you're everybody's busy right now. Time's valuable. On the X-ray stuff. My name is Keith Jensen. I'm with Jackson Group Peterbilt. I'm kind of the guy that put this event together. We did this in Salt Lake City the other day at our store down there, and it went over really well. And so the emissions rules that are being imposed upon all Americans from the EPA and CARB is the topic of conversation today. Really excited about the crew that we've got assembled. We're going to talk from Peterbilt and from Cummins and kind of walk through what the EPA and CARB are mandating for everybody. Keep in mind, nobody here made these rules, and so don't throw tomatoes at anybody. The fact of the matter is there's hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of investment been put in place to try and obtain power in these trucks that can adhere to the rules that are being really driven by the EPA and CARB specifically. In Utah the other day, Utah is not a CARB state. Oregon and Washington are CARB states. Oregon specifically is a CARB state. And 2024 is a looming emissions deadline that we're putting, that everybody's forced with. So 2024, as I'm sure everybody here can attest to the calendar, is 11 months and 5 days away. So it's really close and it's very complicated. And unfortunately, some of those rules that we have to deal with, been really tough to do. So it's going to change the lineup of power and what we're seeing over the next few years, and it's forcing the engine manufacturers to have to build new products. And so I'm not going to steal these guys' thunder, but very smart guys. These are the guys that are driving the innovation from both PACCAR and Cummins, and so excited to kind of hear what they have to say today. The format is going to be, if you look at Cummins has been kind enough to give us a little book. In the book, I think at the back of the book, Ron, so the back of the book is a QR code. If you take your phone out and snap a picture of that QR code or hold the camera over QR code, it'll take you to a spot where you can ask questions. The questions are being formulated on that laptop over there. So kind of at the end of this thing, we'll have a Q&A session. Just for everybody's information, we are recording this and we're live streaming this. Welcome everybody on the live stream. Most of the Jackson Group has 31 stores in 8 Western states, and we've done this event twice. So most of the customers that we do business with are on the internet right now. And so this information will be uploaded to a website that your salesman can hand out to you once we get it done. It takes a couple of days, as long with the presentations. We got the presentations from both of the uploaded. So the information is very complicated. It's very confusing. The rollout of the rules makes it confusing, but it's good to listen to it and understand, because everybody in here has to run your business, and what we're doing is what's being required of us is going to affect everything. It just is. And so Jason Rapley, Curtis Hibbert, stand up. These are the guys that run our group here in Oregon. Jason's our general manager here. Curtis is our sales manager here. So if you want to kill anybody, kill those guys. Thank you. Did I forget anything? I'm going to introduce Steve Wolverton from Peterbilt Motors Company. He's going to walk through the first presentation, and then we're going to go through the Peterbilt people. It's going to take about hour and a half between everybody, and then we'll keep the last 30 minutes of a Q&A session, and we'll be able to ask questions too. Don't be shy about raising your hand if you have a question. And then from noon to 1, the game plan is we'll have lunch, and then we'll be able to have some individual questions as well with each of these guys at lunch. So, Stephen, what we're going
All right, fantastic. So as Keith said, my name is Stephen Wolverton. I'm Assistant Director of Product Planning at Peterbilt. We're typically responsible for 5 to 10 years out. We're working on 27 right now as an example, but fortunately or unfortunately, I've become the subject matter expert for 24. Take it for what you will. So today we're going to talk about regulations, as Keith said, kind of what's going to be happening here in Oregon and some of the surrounding states. Make sure you guys are prepared. So before we get started, there's multiple agencies here. Everything is dynamic. This is what we know today. It can change before implementation in 11 months and 5 days. So from an agency standpoint, we have EPA, Environmental Protection Agency, as well as Environment and Climate Change Canada. That's Canada's regulatory body. And they're responsible for making regulations for the broader US and Canada, respectively. California Resource Board obviously has regulations for CARB and CARB following states. So there's states, Oregon, a number of them I'll show you in just a second, that are following CARB's rules. So as we look at this, there's 2 primary aspects where CARB is focused on regulatory changes for the heavy-duty truck market. The first is internal combustion engine emissions with the heavy-duty omnibus low NOx requirement. That's a 75% NOx reduction in 24, 90% in 27. We'll talk about that more later. And emissions warranty. So today, all of you guys here that are DOT'd, and if any of you guys are DOT'd in California, then you're paying for a CARB emissions warranty. 5-year, 350,000 miles versus 5-year, 100,000 miles. Then the second piece of it is zero emissions vehicles. So CARB has fully approved and in regulation the Advanced Clean Truck or ACT mandate. That's a sales requirement that says we have to sell X% of trucks as zero emissions vehicles. They are working on an advanced clean fleet. As a matter of fact, there's another hearing in a couple of weeks, mid-February, correct? Which is the buying mandate. It means you guys will have to buy certain percentage, it's percentage based on application, but of zero emissions vehicles. So that is coming. It's imminent. I can't tell you exactly when it'll come, but it will be coming where you'll be required to buy. So looking at the changes in 23, as I said, we have the same engine platform for EPA and CARB. The difference is the emissions warranty. 5-year 350 for CARB versus 5-year 100,000 for EPA. The only state that this is applicable to or required in is California today. No other state requires this extended emissions warranty. We have lots of customers that are buying it because it's a longer warranty and it's better for them, but it's not required. In 24, we will have different hardware sets between EPA and CARB. There will be no, hey, I bought a truck and it's an EPA truck, let me convert it to CARB. That does not work. We'll not be able to do it. So again, in addition to the emissions warranty, you have the NOx change. From a state perspective, you can see the shaded states here. I'll move out of the way, make sure I'm not covering that. Oregon has officially adopted CARB's omnibus NOx rule in 24. Massachusetts has adopted it in 25. And you can see the other states there, Washington and some eastern states and Hawaii. If you guys happen to drive to Hawaii, you may want to be cognizant of that. But in 26, that's where we expect those states to come in. So what this means, if you're DOT'd in one of these states, California, Washington in 26, Oregon in 24, you must have a CARB compliant engine. If you're DOT'd in, say, Nevada, right, or Idaho, or Montana, or someplace not one of these states, you don't have to have a CARB compliant engine. And it's our interpretation that even if you're operating in these states, you don't have to have one. But again, if you're DOT'd in one of these states, which I assume several of you guys are, then you'll have to have CARB compliant engines. So we'll run through the impacts to the engine availability. Keith mentioned that, and then allow you guys to ask a couple of questions before we move on. So starting with the MX-13, it will be available in CARB and CARB following states in a 455 and a 510 horsepower rating. Covers 95% of our sales of the MX. There will be a cost increase again, so there's a hardware change. that we have to do to support the 90 or 75% NOx reduction. The MX-11 will not be available. If you're buying an MX-11 today and you're in one of these states, you're going to need to migrate to the MX-13. The X15 high horsepower, 525 and above will be available. It'll be available under CARB's high horsepower exemption, so we will be volume limited based on 2019 sales, right? So it's not unlimited amount. And it likely too will be increased costs due to the limited availability of the engine. The efficiency engine, so this is the 500 and below, they will be available under CARB's legacy engine provisions, but it's going to have pretty limited availability. And it will be significant in cost to make up for the changes. Also, this engine will no longer be available in 26. And then finally, we have the X15N, which is the new 15-liter natural gas. It'll be available in early 24 and will not have volume limits. Does anybody have any quick questions about this before we move on? Sure.
Do the X15 produce this year? We put just bought a truck with a 500 horsepower. Are those going to be CARB compliant?
So the question was, is my 500 horsepower, which is an efficiency engine, is it CARB compliant that we bought this year? The answer is yes. It's engine model year 24, which won't start until January 1st.
Actually, we purchased it last year. So
That's not. It's engine model year. Any other questions? Also, I promise you nobody's building 24 engines there. Nobody wants to build it.
Hey, Stephen, to that question, I appreciate the Yelp dollar signs over there, but I know we've had some questions on maybe some estimations of cost. I mean, I know we're still working on it, but is there a round number you can give everybody?
Sure. So Jason's question was, we put the dollar signs over here because we are still working through finalizing the cost, but kind of what might it be? I wouldn't be surprised to see incremental costs for a CARB engine being $15,000 to $20,000. So this slide shows kind of where we see our competitive landscape. What I would say is if anybody in here knows of something different, please let us know. We continue to reach out to customers, to dealers, to anybody we can to understand what the landscape in California is going to look like. On the left-hand side with the Freightliner, we expect their DD16 to be available in some limited volume, probably around 100 units based on their historical sales in these states. The DD15 we've heard is not going to be available. And the DD13 kind of have been getting mixed information, but I think the latest that we're hearing is that it may be available in some limited quantity. With the International, they just released their S13 engine, and based on their Traton group, that engine will not be CARB certified. The A26 is going to be going away in 24, so it doesn't look like International will have much of anything to offer. And then finally on the right, Volvo Mac has been very tight-lipped on all this. We have some shared dealers. They haven't been given a whole lot of information, but really everybody we talk to says that Volvo Mac's focus has been on zero emissions vehicles and not much talk on this. So again, after this is all over, if anybody has any different information, I'm happy to talk about that. In the medium duty space, the PX9 will be available under legacy engine provisions, which means that the 9-liter engine has some availability. Again, fairly expensive for what it is, but it will be available in 24 and 25, no longer available in 26. PX7 or the E67 will be in the same boat. It'll have availability in 24 and 25, will not be available in 26 and beyond. The L9N, so natural gas 9-liter will be available, no volume restrictions on that engine. The V67N, so we just released this in our 2.1 liter medium duty product, will not be available in CARB volume states. The volume on that's pretty low anyway, so I'm not sure that many in here have actually run that engine. And then finally, if you guys haven't heard, there is a V67 octane. Octane, fancy word for gasoline. No, if you guys haven't heard of it, What I would say with this engine is everybody kind of goes through 4 stages of grief, right? Everybody remembers the top pick of the 80s and 90s, the Chevy 454. That thing was a real not great vehicle, right? Couldn't hardly get out of his way, maybe lasted 50,000 miles. That's not this engine. And I'm not up here trying to sell the engine. Cummins will do that in a minute. You know, we generally, when we talk to customers, they first think we're crazy. Talk about a gasoline engine in this space. Then we start talking to them more about and showing them the torque curve, showing them the engine, and they get, hey, this might work. And then we've brought a number of customers in, probably 20 or 30, and had them actually drive the truck competitively against the diesel. And hey, this thing actually runs pretty good, very diesel-like. But then the 4th stage of grief is always, it's got to make sense financially. So this engine will be out there in 25. It will be the carbon solution in the perpetuity as we go forward, right? No more diesels, no more 7-liter diesel in CARB states, you know, 24. Any questions here?
So great. Subsidy program, right?
So your question is there going to be maybe some grant funding or something like that to offset the incremental cost of these new engines? The answer to that is no. Today, there is some funding for natural gas, right? Natural gas today is $50,000, $60,000 all in, right? Incremental engine costs plus fuel system costs. There are grants for those. I personally see that shrinking in the future as there's more of a focus on electric vehicles. Dusty, would you agree with that?
Yeah, there's still some states doing natural gas, but over the next few years, and we've already seen some states start to say zero emission only on their grant application.
Any other quick questions before we transition off of this? We'll have time for Q&A. All right. So transferring or transitioning to the advanced clean truck, said earlier that California fully approved their act mandate. This will require zero emissions vehicles for us to sell zero emission vehicles, starting with 5% of tractors in 24, 9% of vocational or straight trucks. And by 2040, 100%, everything we sell into CARB and CARB following states must be zero emissions. Everything, not most of it, but everything. And when we look at those states, you can see here, California is the only one in 24. Washington, Oregon, New Jersey, New York, Massachusetts have all officially adopted 25. That means that starting in 25, here in the state of Oregon, we have to have zero emissions vehicles in play. If we can't sell enough to meet our normal diesel demand, we will have to reduce our diesel sales, right? In other words, if we typically sell 1,000 trucks and the requirement's 10%, if we can't sell 100 trucks, 100 zero emissions, then we will reduce the diesel payment. So this will impact you guys very, very soon. Good news is it's not all doom and gloom, and I don't want to steal, Matt and his thunder in the product, but Peterbilt does have the widest offering of zero emission vehicles. The Model 220 in a pickup and delivery operation, the Model 520 for refuse, I believe it's 1,100 bins in a single charge, and the Model 579, which is a regional application, 150-ish miles of 82,000 pounds. And we continue to invest in our products, right? We're working on a medium duty conventional product. We're working on expanded application of these products and also expanding range. So yes, there is a lot changing from a regulatory perspective, but we are investing to make sure we can support it. With that, does anybody have any quick questions before I turn it over to Matt Wetta? Yes, sir.
So you guys are required to sell or produce 10%. Are us as buyers required to buy?
So the question is, there's a sales mandate from the OEMs. Is there a buying mandate from the customer's point of view? The answer is no, not yet. That's Advanced Clean Fleet, and it has not been fully adopted. And that'll, like I said, There's another, California calls them public hearings, which is probably appropriate. But there's another hearing in February. Now, you may not be required to buy them, but you won't be able to buy diesel trucks if you don't buy them. I mean, it's literally going to be that simple. You have a question?
Yeah, you haven't mentioned hydrogen at all. Does that come into the equation anywhere?
Yeah, so there's two types of hydrogen fuel cell and hydrogen ICE is what we call it, hydrogen internal combustion. So hydrogen fuel cell is where you use hydrogen to run through a generator to create power to operate a truck electrically, a battery powered truck. We're working on that. We have a couple of trucks in operation at some of the ports under like demo units. We're working on getting that in, probably looking at 27, 28, 29 for looking on sustainable production. Hydrogen ICE, there's some work being done on that as well, but you're probably not looking at until later half of the decade, as well, 27 through 29. You still have a challenge overall with how much the fueling cost and the infrastructure is there. So yes, we are looking at it, but a lot has to happen. There's not solutions here right now for that. Yes, sir.
You mentioned the 579 being allowed to pull 82,000 pounds. What's the actual weight of the 579 truck by itself?
So I believe it's how much? 22.5. That's the 150, correct? Couple more, yes, sir.
And just to be clear, these regulations only apply to sales of new trucks. You can still sell used.
Yeah, so all regulations apply to new motor vehicles. The definition.
Drive your 2025 truck around Nevada.
Well, it's actually 7,500, but the answer to your question is yes. New motor vehicle is anything registered with 7,500 miles or less. It's the current definition. Could change in the future. Yes, sir.
So to follow up on that question, then are you going to address what we're going to do with our existing fleet as far as to make them compliant?
So then you're talking about like a retrofit. There's no requirements for that at the moment. There may be in the future. I know there's a
Oregon
power mandate.
has requirements to move towards this right now, and in Multnomah County is actually pushing it for quicker.
But there
And
is
we had to pull an exception on our older trucks.
older than 2010, correct?
We had a 2007.
Right, there is a repower mandate, I believe, from California that I'm not sure, I think it's in the next year or so, it has to be a 2010 or newer. That is happening, but we're not planning on making retrofit kits for like 2006, 2007 for ultra low max.
So like I've got the MX-15, so those are, but they I've got a couple of new ones, but we have several that go back to 12, 13, 14.
I have not seen regulatory action that would require all vehicles to be brought up to current standards. I haven't seen that yet, but I'll take that back and reach out to our folks.
09 is the oldest, is the newest I've seen.
Yeah, 2010. Well, yes, 09, 010 repower, that I've seen, but not like hey, your 2015s or 2014s or any of that has to come up to current.
So currently, Multnomah, Clackamas, and Washington County will not register a truck manufactured or an engine manufactured 96 or before.
Right.
We had no full exception for one of ours in 93.
Mhm.
And they're also making us certify that our 97 truck isn't actually a 96. They won't just register.
Yeah.
But they are allowed retrofits on that at the time.
Okay, I'm not as well versed in that, but I do, like I said, I know there's in the next year or two, there'll be a 2010 requirement, which anything registered has to be 2010. Any other questions? Surely somebody else has one more question.
So how long does it take to charge to get your 100 miles on the electric rig? And then also, we're in 105,000 state here. So So is there anything that can pull 105 that's electric?
So I know the answer to the first question because I asked that yesterday on the way from the airport here, and it's 3 hours with a DC fast charger. Getting better at this every day. The second one, right now I don't think we're rated at 105, but we're continuing to invest in our product and figure out where we can expand application coverage, make sure we're meeting the needs of our customers. So with that, I'll turn it over to Matt.
Are you all able to hear me all right? Not yelling at you? Okay. So good morning. My name is Matt Wetta. I'm responsible for EV sales at Peterbilt. I'm going to switch over presentations real quick, I think. So just a little background on myself. I've been at Peterbilt about 18 years now. I've been in various different roles throughout manufacturing, operations, sales, engineering, etc. And so I've got a pretty good understanding of the things that we do with our diesel trucks today, and I'll try to help you all think about how EV trucks work within that framework of what we do today with a diesel truck. So one thing I always try to tell folks is I don't necessarily want everybody to leave here thinking that everything you do with a diesel truck is something you want to try immediately tomorrow to do with an EV truck. And so I hope you think about where those best applications are. So to start with, this is our model lineup in the EV space today. We've got the Model 579, which would be a Class 8 tractor. It's capable of 82,000 pounds GCW. We have started looking at some case-by-case larger GCW exemptions, but I'll kind of wait till we've got a little more information before I talk about those. The refuse space is a really good application for EV technology. We've got the Model 520 EV that's oriented primarily at that, and then the Model 220 EV in the Class 6-7 P&D space. So I'm going to start out just by talking a little about what Stephen started to mention on the ACT or CARB truck mandate, purchase mandate. And so first, in the state of California, in 2024, the trucks that we sell into that state, we must have a certain percentage of those vehicles be EV, and that's dictated by the year and the type of the vehicle. Shortly behind that, in the state of Oregon, Washington, New York, New Jersey, and Massachusetts, in 25, we'll have those same rules. And so these are the percentages of our sales, which must be zero emission vehicle sales. And so if you're a Class 8 tractor hauler, and we're talking in 25 here, I think the numbers go up just slightly, but just to make the math easy on myself, if you're a 20 truck fleet and you're running Class 8 tractors, you would need to have 5% or one of those vehicles as an EV. If you're a straight truck hauler or a refuse hauler or medium duty fleet, that number is almost twice as big. It's around 10 or 11% in 2025. And so the way that we at Peterbilt are thinking about that is, as our partners at Jackson Group, we ask them to hit those same numbers. And then I expect they too would ask you guys as their partners, how can we get to these kinds of numbers? And so as we progress through the presentation here, I'll try to help you think about what places in your business are EVs most appropriate. Another thing to mention here, if you look at the states in green, which is a lot of other states, they've all signed an MOU or a memorandum of understanding saying they intend to adopt these rules as well. And then the US broadly, in terms of the EPA, has also talked about having a mandate like this. That's not firmly legislated. And so maybe it'll happen in 27. That's, I think, our most recent look into the crystal ball. It's hard to say exactly when, but we expect that that will happen at some point. And so maybe one takeaway from this conversation is wherever you are, wherever you register your trucks, this is probably coming. It's just a question of how long it's going to take to get there. For those of you that register trucks in the state of Oregon, 2025 is when this starts to take effect. And so make sure that that's a thing that you remember from the conversation today. So the second thing The second thing I like to make sure folks understand is, aside from just the pure legal mandate of I must adopt a percentage of my trucks, there's also the question of how this tech. Oh, there we go. I was thinking I was missing the mic. Can you all hear me okay again? Okay. So the second thing to make sure we're thinking about is, aside from the legal mandate portion of the question, there's a question of what's the best tool for the job. And so that's something we're all looking at every day within our businesses and what we do. Hopefully that's a big reason why y'all are Peterbilt customers, is the best tool for the job. And so as we look at this technology and how we expect it to change, as well as how diesel technology will change in the future, we want to think about what is the best tool for the job that I'm doing. And so across the top are the mandate types of requirements. Across the bottom is more of a look at that, what's the best tool for the job component. And so on the bottom left there are the rules that are coming on diesel. And so Stephen talked about some of the impacts that are coming in regard to NOx emissions, and first in California in 24, and then everywhere, EPA broadly in 27. And so essentially it's another step change in tailpipe out NOx, similar to what we saw in 2007, 2010 timeframe. And that's going to make a diesel vehicle heavier. It's going to take a little bit more space to package those components. It's going to make it more expensive. All those things kind of similar to what we saw in 2007 and 2010. Across the top is GHG regulations, or greenhouse gas regulations. Essentially, they're requiring us to sell a more and more fuel efficient mix of vehicles. And so obviously that's a good thing, but just like what we've seen in the automotive industry, it's more and more difficult to continue to climb that curve for better and better fuel economy. And so the example I always use is back in 2005, I bought a Chevy pickup. It was about 25 grand, had a big naturally aspirated V8 and a 4-speed transmission. Well, now if I go buy a pickup, it's 3 times that expensive. It's got a twin turbo V6 and 10 gears and auto start stop and all kinds of technology on it to improve fuel economy, which is good. My truck does get better fuel economy than it did 15 years ago, but it's also 3 times as expensive. And so those same kinds of things are coming at us in the truck space. And so as we work to meet these requirements, our trucks will too have to get more expensive and more technologically advanced to continue to climb that fuel economy curve. And so if we think about how that affects the choices we make in our businesses going forward, it means that a diesel truck is probably going to continue to become more expensive. Also, just speaking broadly in the truck world or just automotive manufacturing in general, EV technology is growing in its volumes, in its scale, and in its cost effectiveness. And so we think that's going to allow us to make a typical EV truck more and more capable and less expensive. Combined with electricity as a cheaper fuel source than diesel fuel or gasoline, we think that that means the more and more we go forwards in time, the more and more jobs are going to make sense to be done with an electric vehicle, just purely from an economic standpoint. And so that's the other consideration to consider here is what's the most economically viable technology for the job that I'm trying to do. So the last thing I wanted to mention on this, and then we'll start to talk more about the actual vehicles themselves and what you need to consider to adopt them, is the speed at which you can adopt them. And so barring the current extraordinary times that we're in normal conditions, you know, you can go down here and talk to Curtis or talk to Keith or talk to Jason, and you can order up a truck, and in a fairly short period of time, that truck will be built down in Denton, Texas or wherever and delivered to you, 6 months or less. And you probably don't need to think super hard about anything else other than just what that lead time is to get the vehicle and put it into service. But with electric vehicles, there's a lot more to think about. And so I find usually from a first customer conversation like this, it takes most folks around 6 months to get to the point where they've got the charging figured out and the economics figured out, maybe a grant lined up if they're looking for that, et cetera, et cetera. And that lets them get to that purchase decision point. Following that, It's going to take us another 6 months typically, and oftentimes longer, to get that vehicle in place in your fleet and operating every day. In most cases, the longest lead time item to do that is getting the electrical infrastructure in place, the amount of electricity you require to run the vehicle. We'll talk a little more about that in a minute. Once you've completed that, usually you want to run these vehicles for a period of time and say, well, does this truck do all the things Matt told me it do? Does it go this far? You know, how much energy does it use? How do I work on it? What are my maintenance costs, et cetera, et cetera. And that lets you make a broader and better and more informed decision about how to do this within your business. And so at that point, you can start to assemble a broader business plan. So say I have a 100 truck fleet, I'm not buying a couple of these things. I want to put 20 of them into place or something like that. What does that look like? Where would I do that? Where are the economics the best? Where are the routes fit, et cetera? At that point, you call up your utility and say, hey, I want to put 20 trucks into service over here. I need 2 megawatts of power. And they're going to tell you, give me about 18 months, 2 years, and we can get that to you. And that's the kind of lead times we're talking here. And so because of that, if we know there's a date in the future where we're expected to be running significant volumes of these vehicles, we've really got to start now, and we've got to get our hands around how this affects us so that we can make good plans into the future, or we'll be just too far behind to adopt this at a reasonable speed. And so that's another big point I'd like to leave you with today is if you live in the state of Oregon and you register trucks in the state of Oregon and you're going to have to adopt these vehicles, man, the best time to start is now. We don't learn other than by doing. And there's things that we're going to learn as a manufacturer as we broaden our ability to build these vehicles at pace. There's things you're going to learn as an operator in terms of maintenance and cost of ownership, et cetera. And we've all got to start walking down this path together so that we can figure out how to do this at scale. So again, these are those kind of numbers in terms of adoption that we're looking at here in the near term. And so if you're a Class 8 fleet, 5%, or 1 truck in 20 as an EV. If you were a straight truck fleet, it's about 2 and 20, or 10%. So that's kind of the regulatory why we must piece of the conversation. I'm going to transition a little bit into what things do you need to be thinking about as you consider EVs for your fleet. And so fortunately, we're a leader in the space. We've already been working on this for a bunch of years, and we are investing heavily in this space. We've got product plans, as Stephen was mentioning, out through the end of the decade, and expanding these vehicles in terms of capability, application, model coverage, et cetera, et cetera. So this is just an example of some of the fleets that we've already got vehicles either on order with or in service or beginning to operate, and that will just continue to grow rapidly. So as I was saying, with the diesel truck, you really just are thinking about the truck and the application you need to put it into. With an EV vehicle, there's more things you need to consider. And so first of all, it's the truck and the application. But secondly, you need to think about how fast do I need to charge this vehicle, the electrical infrastructure to support that. And then lastly, ideally, if you can, you'd like to knock down some grant funding to help with the purchase price of these vehicles as well. And so we've created a team to help with all those pieces, and we'd love to help you. So the first big thing is application. Kind of as I said at the top, we don't want you to leave here today thinking that every job you do with the truck is something you want to try right away tomorrow with an EV. There's certain things that an EV is more suitable for or better at, and there's things that it's maybe less suitable for. And so this is just kind of the main things to think about in terms of where might I want to consider EV technology. And so the first one is range. If you've read an article about any EV, whether it's a car or a pickup or a big truck, every single one of them, almost the first thing they talk about is range. And that same thing is true for us. In fact, it's probably even more true for us. And so we're big, we push a lot of wind out of the way, we're heavy, we haul a lot of weight, and that both those things require energy. And so the range limitation that exists in the car space exists for us too, but it's probably even more acute. And so across our model lineup here, we've got the medium duty truck, the Model 220, Class 6-7. It can go 100, 150, or 200 miles on a charge, depending on how you spec the vehicle. So that's our longest range offering today. The next would be the 579. It can go about 150 miles on a charge. And then the model 520, I usually say is about 100 on the average, but it can be lesser and it can be more depending on the application and the body's energy consumption. And so I won't go into a ton of detail there, but on the long end of the spectrum in some applications, especially with an energy efficient body, I think we might be able to go as far as about 120 miles. And then on the more conservative end of the spectrum, in either a challenging application or a less energy efficient body, I think we could be as low as maybe around 60 miles. And it just depends upon that application and the body's energy efficiency. But those range numbers are the first big thing to consider. And so I'm sure there's many of you in here that are saying, well, I can't go only 150 miles. I need to go further than that for my particular application. And we understand that some jobs aren't yet really ready to consider EVs for adoption. Usually what I find is folks think about just kind of their fleet broadly and they say, well, most of my trucks are running 400 miles a day, Matt. I can't even consider this. But if you stop and think for a moment, I bet you there's a few trucks that are running in particular routes or in particular jobs that are closer to that shorter end of the spectrum. And so those are the ones we want to start to think about for adoption of this technology. And then with that experience, with that first penetration into the fleet, we can start to build our way up there in terms of range as we continue to advance the technology. One other thing maybe to mention on range is what we call opportunity charging. And so if you have a route that you know is going to go out and do a couple deliveries, unload, come back, pick up another load and go back out, you can charge while you're unloading and loading. And that's referred to as opportunity charging or charging fast. And so for example, on a 579, if you have a fast charger, we can add say 50, 60 miles of range in about 1 hour's time. So that's another thing to consider as you think about an application or a duty cycle for EV adoption. Maybe one last consideration, and Jennifer may talk about this a little bit more in her presentation, but with a diesel truck, you really just think about the time when you're using the truck and you don't think about the rest of the time. With an EV truck, you really want to think about both the times when the vehicle is busy and the times when it's idle or stationary, because those are your opportunity charge time periods. And so as an example, we've got several fleets that we're running the 579 EV with today that are running 4 and 5 mile routes back and forth from logistics centers to manufacturing plants. And so you might think, well, 5 or 6 miles, super short, I don't need to worry about range at all. Well, these guys are running to plants that operate 24/7, 365. And so you have to think about when during that time can I accomplish the charging that I need to accomplish. And so for some folks in an application like that, you might need to consider a pretty fast charger so you can top that vehicle back up and get back to work. On the other hand, if you're a refuse fleet, most of those guys are operate during the day and then the truck sits overnight and then runs again the next day. And so an application like that can use a much slower charger because of the idle time of the vehicle. And so thinking about not just when you're using the vehicle, but when you're going to charge the vehicle is kind of a new thing we have to consider as we look at EVs. So the second point here is weight. And so again, just like range is kind of a fundamental thing with EVs, weight is a fundamental thing with EVs. And so every EV out there, whether it's a Tesla Model 3, an F-150 Lightning, or a Peterbilt 579 EV, it's going to be heavier than a similar combustion engine vehicle for a given range. It's just a fact. Batteries are heavy and they're big and they're expensive. And so because of that, you're going to have a more heavy vehicle, which is going to impact payload. And so in the car space, that's really not a big deal, but of course it is to us in the truck space, and especially for certain applications. And so the 579 EV or the 520, I generally say is 6,000 to 7,000 pounds heavier than a similar diesel vehicle. So 579 EV, for example, is going to be around 22.5, and then a similar diesel vehicle usually is around 16,000 pounds fuel. Can be a little lighter and a little heavier depending on how you spec your vehicles, but that should give you an idea. In the medium duty space, the number is 2,000 to 4,000 depending upon weights. And so I would say a fairly similar vehicle in the diesel space is going to be around 11,000 pounds, just tear weight of the chassis, and then an additional 2 to 4,000 pounds, depending on which range variant you're picking. And so those weight impacts are the second things to keep in mind. One additional note on that, as we think about the weight limits that we're bumping against and determining payload in the Class 8 space, all your Class 8s get an additional 2,000 pounds over the current bridge limit if they're EV. And so that can be carried on any axle or axle group as long as it's capable of those additional 2,000 pounds. In the medium duty space, so Class 7 and Class 6, those limits are the same. They don't change for the EV. So that doesn't fully make up for the additional weight impact of the EV, but it does at least help mitigate some of it. And so that's another thing to be aware of. So the last 2 points are more pros, or where does this technology work the best? And so what I always try to help folks think about is within the things that you do with your trucks today, where's the EV technology most beneficial? And so if we think about what a diesel truck does really well, it's going to go get on that interstate, it's going to cruise down the road at 65 miles an hour. And that's where your fuel economy is going to be best. That's where your reliability is going to be best. That's where your maintenance costs are going to be the best. You take that same diesel truck and you put it in refuse and you stop and go 1,000 times a day, your efficiency is dramatically worse. Your maintenance costs are higher. A lot of our refuse guys doing like an ASL are doing 3 and 4 sets of brakes in a year. They're probably measuring their fuel economy in gallons per hour. It's challenging. And so an EV is really good in those things that are more challenging for a diesel truck to do. And the main reason why that is because of our ability to regeneratively brake. So we can use electricity out of the battery pack to bring the vehicle up to speed. And when we want to slow down, we turn that motor into a generator and we actually create electricity to slow the vehicle down. And we put that back in the batteries. And so those more stop-go type jobs, you're fighting traffic here in Portland, you're picking up residential refuse, start, stop. That's the stuff you want to try to go after first with an electric vehicle, because that's where your ROI is going to be the best. Your cost for the electricity is going to be much less than you would spend if you were fueling that same truck as a diesel. And so those are the places you want to think about this technology first, and then again, kind of build your way up from there. The last thing is charging. And so today, I would say broadly, there's really not charging out there that's publicly available that's intended to charge our vehicles. There are some chargers out there that are appropriately sized, have the right plug, but mostly they're aimed at the passenger car space. So you're not going to make a ton of friends if you go pull into a charging station and block like 8 stalls with your semi. And so you want to try and identify the applications where you can return to a charger you install on your property. You can charge that thing overnight or whatever your use case may be. And so those applications that are returned to that same home base are going to be easier to consider because the charging is significantly expensive to install for the first time. And so if you have to range over a big geographic area and charge in lots of spots, now you have to make that same investment 2, 3, 4 times, and it starts to get cost prohibitive. Whereas if you can just return to that same home base, that's where your ROI is going to be the best. I'm not going to go into a bunch of detail on the vehicle specs, but I'll just touch on it briefly just to kind of give you a little look at it. But the 579 is a Class 8 6x4 tractor, 82K GCW, very similar to the way our diesel vehicle would look and be architected. Big difference is, of course, power and range. And so from a power perspective, everybody I've ever ridden in with an EV loves them. We've got 400 kilowatts or a little over 500 horsepower continuous. So think about that as how quickly you can climb a grade. And then 500 kilowatts or near 700 horse peak power. And so that's how quickly you can accelerate from a stop or decelerate. And so the vehicle is much, much easier to manage with traffic and all those things because you can accelerate and accelerate more like a car. And so drivers just absolutely love these things. Every time I've ever driven with anyone in one or driven with one myself, it's a much nicer driving experience, and your drivers are going to love them. And so that's one big pro is drivers just really enjoy driving these vehicles as compared to a combustion engine vehicle. On the range, we already talked about that, but just one additional thing I'll mention there. As you look at our vehicles or others for that matter, one good kind of just filter to have in your head is kilowatt hours is essentially the size of your fuel tank in electrical terms. And so just like we would expect a 50-gallon fuel tank truck to go a certain distance or a 100-gallon fuel tank truck to go a certain distance, so too can you look at the number of kilowatt hours of battery capacity on a given vehicle and kind of use that as a little bit of a filter for how far I might expect it to go. And so our goal in advertising range is to try to be relatively conservative and relatively accurate with how far we think the vehicle will go. As with diesel trucks, some trucks get 8 miles to the gallon and some trucks get 5, depends on what you're doing with it. So too does it matter in the EV space. And so I'm sure that we won't always be perfect with our range math, but that's a reasonable estimate of what we think the truck will do in a typical job loaded as you would expect to use a vehicle like this. If you're doing two main things to think about in terms of range that are not what you're used to maybe. So the first one I kind of talked about a little bit on the regen side. So with a diesel truck, your fuel economy is best on the interstate and worst in traffic. With an EV, we're just the opposite of that. And so because we can regen, we can go further with a given size battery. And so those slower speed start-stop type jobs are where our range is going to be the best. And if you take that same truck and you just go get on the interstate and you drive at 70 the whole time, that's actually going to be your lowest range because you're using the most energy because you're pushing all that wind out of the way. And so that's one thing to keep in mind as you look at range. The other one, I don't think you get crazy cold here, but definitely not always warm. The colder it gets, that will impact range a little bit as well. And so the reason for that is we're actually using some of the electricity out of the battery to heat the cab. And with a diesel truck, you've just always got a bunch of heat that you're going to send out the tailpipe or the radiator anyway. And so when it's cold outside, we just pipe a little bit of that into the cab and you're nice and warm. With an EV, we're having to use some of the electricity we would use for range to keep the driver warm, keep the powertrain warm. And so that'll impact your range in cold climates. So if you know you're going to be running in a place that's very cold, you want to try to have a little bit of additional range buffer to the advertised number to make sure you can get done what you need to get done in the day. Last thing I'll mention is batteries are thermally managed. So one thing that's kind of true for batteries is they're like Goldilocks. They don't like to be too hot. They don't like to be too cold. And so we've got a thermal management system on the truck. We can cool those batteries down if you're in Vegas in the summer. And if you're in Montreal in the winter, we can heat them up, make sure that they perform as expected and last a long time. And so that's a thing that we take care of in the truck. This is the design of the truck to make sure that your vehicle lasts for a long time, just like your diesel one would. I won't go into a bunch of detail on the other two vehicles, but just briefly, the 520, very similar to the 579, just different cab and chassis oriented towards the refuse space. We can do vocational jobs with both models. We can put a PTO on there. We can run a wet kit, et cetera, et cetera. We can also configure the battery packs for side loader or rear loader. And so we should be able to kind of configure that vehicle decently for some of the jobs we'd expect for it to be able to do. And then the last one is the Model 220. Again, I'm not going to go into all the detail on it, but just briefly, same things apply, more powerful than a similar diesel vehicle. We can do 24, 26, and 30-foot boxes, a couple different wheelbase increments, Class 6 and Class 7 ratings. So with that, I'm going to kind of jump to the next couple of topics. So Dusty is going to give you guys a little bit of information about some of the grant programs that are available in the area.
I have a quick question. How do these regulations affect longer fleet and single truck?
The question was about how the regulations affect smaller fleets or owner-operator type fleets. I think there's not yet a requirement that applies to the fleet operator in terms of number of trucks they must adopt. There is something in the works called Advanced Clean Fleet in California that would do something like that, but it's not yet fully passed. So I'll kind of skip over that for the moment. I'm not sure if it's as true in Oregon, but in California in general, the grants seem to be favorable towards the smaller fleets and more difficult for the larger fleets. And so the more vehicles you buy or the larger your company, the less apt they are to help give you money towards a truck just at a high level. Does that answer your question?
Sort of. Well, like, we have a basically owner operator. If an owner operator is considered for national, one truck, regulations state. you have to be certain percentage. So that would be 100%. One truck.
I'll let Dusty try to answer that one, and he'll hit on some of the grant stuff as well.
So before I go through the grant stuff, real quick to just kind of clarify on that. So the current regulation that is passed by CARB and the CARB adopting states, the 6 of them, advanced clean truck is on the OEM to sell new purchased vehicles. So it's not a percentage requirement for you to say, hey, in the next couple of years, you have to move 5% of your fleet to zero emission. It's to say, of the vehicles we sell that are going to be registered into that state, 5% of those sales must be zero emission. Okay. The change to that, as Matt mentioned, is advanced clean fleet, if that should be passed in the next, let's say, year, 2 years. Currently, the threshold for that they have written in several of their iterations is 50 trucks. If you are a 50 truck or larger fleet, now you must own a percentage of zero emission vehicles. Again, that regulation is not yet passed. We expect most states who have adopted advanced clean truck will adopt advanced clean fleet because it's all part of the same push. Does that help there?
Yeah.
Okay, great. Yes, sir. Yeah, that's a good point that Stephen makes. So when we talk about own 50 trucks, we're really talking about how many trucks are you in control of. So no more in California would you say, hey, I only own 50 under my name, but I got 20 owner operators that all run freight for me. Those are your trucks as far as their regulation goes. And as far as their grant funding goes as well. Okay, so really he's right. It's not own 50 trucks, it's I direct 50 trucks. I'm in charge of 50 trucks or more. So on the grant side, I know this says Utah, but it's a great example of a similar grant they've had in Oregon and really that is available in every state at some point during the year. So my whole job, and my name is Dusty Garland. I've been Peterbilt about 8.5 years. My whole job is to help you find money to purchase zero emission trucks. And then when we find it, to help you win it. If you say, I don't want to deal with it, I don't have time for this, sure wish somebody would write a grant for me. That's me. That's my job. Okay. So diesel replacement programs have been around a long time. A lot of people call this cash for clunkers, and it's been around in the diesel world for quite a while. It was 25% of your new purchase price. You have to scrap an old truck. Well, it's 45% of your zero emission vehicle price in almost all cases. And it's up to that amount. So we can apply for less depending on the situation. So an example of this is in Utah. Currently, there's $9 million available in Utah. It will cover up to 45% of the truck and charger. You do have to scrap an old truck. It is always better to scrap an 09 or older if you can, because it scores better. These are almost always competitive programs, meaning, hey, there's 30 applicants. They only have a certain amount of money. Somebody's going to win and somebody's not. So are you in an area with really dirty air, a disadvantaged community of low income? Are you scrapping an 03 or are you scrapping a 2016, right? So the 03 is going to score higher if you're getting rid of a quote dirtier truck. They usually do, you have to have owned the truck. So this isn't something where you'll be like, great, I'll just buy one tomorrow and then I'll go apply. You need to have owned it. You need to have operated it. It has to really be running. If you're in a state that does not currently have a program like this, and there are only a few, the National DARE program or Diesel Emission Reduction Act will come out here in the next few months, and anybody in any state can apply. You do have to partner oftentimes with the not-for-profit or like a Clean Cities to do that, and so I'm glad to help with that piece as well. So this one, just to say, there is money out there. Oregon had the same type program last year at the Department of Environmental Quality. So these are the scrap programs. There are also voucher type programs. This is where it's a lot easier on the vehicle operator or owner because you don't have to scrap an old vehicle and you don't have to front the cost and then go get reimbursed. So California's HVIP is an example of this. There is $400+ million available now through HVIP. It's up to $150,000 for our 579 EV, and all of our models are eligible for EV models. So this is just, hey, I want to buy an EV. I'm going to apply for it. Okay, here's the amount of money that you can get. You don't have to scrap anything. In fact, the dealer fronts the cost of that. So when they invoice you a reduced cost by this grant amount. It is their job to go back and get reimbursed from the state. There have been several other programs like this now. Somebody asked earlier about natural gas and grant programs. Those diesel replacement programs oftentimes still have a natural gas component. More states are putting more money to this type program and less of the state's money towards the scrap programs, which means it's really just zero emission. Texas actually had a piece of one of their grants like this year. Massachusetts, New Jersey, New York have all had similar programs. All of Canada has this type program. So I think we'll see more move this direction to try to really give a quick push to the EV and a zero emission world. So I mentioned about voucher rebate programs and scrap programs. One other program, Oregon actually has this, Washington just adopted it, California's had it for some time, is low carbon fuel source credits. So if you are creating fuel or producing fuel, the fuel is either such amount of clean or such amount of dirty, and you get credits or debits for that. The low carbon fuel source says if you own the charger and you own the truck, you're producing that fuel for your vehicles and you're gaining credits. There are open markets in each of those states in which those credits can be sold. So some company says, hey, we want to be cleaner than we are, but we have a job to do that produces dirtier fuel. They can purchase your credits. The offset of this, and this was in the last year or so in California, was a truck, an EV that ran 40,000 miles a year would make about $15,000 to $20,000 back on the open market in low carbon fuel source credits. So it is a little bit of a complicated thing. There are brokers out there that work on this because they're going to take your credits and somebody else's credits and somebody else's, package them together and sell those to large companies who want to be cleaner through the purchase of credits there. But it's something to consider in total cost of ownership. And then federal tax incentives. So the Inflation Reduction Act that was recently passed included a $40,000 tax credit for medium and heavy duty zero emission vehicles. So if you take possession of a zero emission vehicle on or after January 1st, 2023, so now for the next 10 years, you are eligible for a $40,000 tax credit on your normal annual tax return. There is also a tax credit for infrastructure. It was 30% up to $30,000. That has been increased to 30% up to $100,000. So more of a credit there. There are a few more hooks in it now. So some things about you need to be in a low income area or a rural area. The people that are installing it need to have certain programs for apprenticeship set up. And so everybody's kind of working towards those. Happy to dig into it more with you, but there is a little bit more there to decipher. And lastly, that QR code on the right, if you have a phone with a camera on it, and as most of us do, I would just ask that you point it at that and get that website there. So Peterbilt.com has an EV incentives page. If there is a truck incentive that I know about that is open for application, it is on that page. And so I go through every week or two and I pull off the ones that are no longer accepting applications. I add new ones just to make sure everybody has that. You're welcome to contact me about them. You're welcome to use it for yourself and go apply for it on your own. It is just a resource to help you find that funding. I'm going to turn it over to Jennifer Davis from PACCAR Parts. She's going to talk to you about chargers and some infrastructure.
Hi, everyone. Super excited to be here today. Again, my name is Jennifer Davis. I'm with PACCAR Parts, been there for about 6 years now, and just recently moved into the EV charger role, but here to help you kind of understand what you need to think about when you're thinking about a charger. Very similar to how you think about the truck and the application you need. Matt kind of touched on it a little bit as well, but really need to think about what's my downtime, what's reasonable for me, is there chances for opportunity charging, do I have enough electricity or power at my location now, how much infrastructure really needs to be done, and that's going to gauge how much you're going to be spending on these chargers and the infrastructure. So for PACCAR Parts, we do have a wide range of variety of chargers here. You can see there are some standalone units. Those are going to need to be bolted to the ground on a skid plate, metal skid plate, or on concrete pads. We also do have some wall mounts, or you can purchase a pedestal with these as well, just whatever works best for your space. Be able to pull the truck up and hook it up right there to the power. And then something that has been really popular lately is the Heliox mobile units. So these are really great if you're new into the space, you need to move it around. You do need a 480 volt 3-phase to be able to plug those in, but you can move it out of the way, good for shops, good to move around if you have multiple applications that you're gonna do. So I'm gonna go through here. This is just a graph to show kind of what's your minimum, what's the base model, what's gonna be more of your expert type stuff you're looking at, especially if you are going to have multiple vehicles, understanding that there are options to have 2 hookups. The ones in the minimum and base, those are only going to be 1 truck at a time. So these are kind of the charge times as well. You can see based on the truck what they're going to take you. If you have the opportunity to do it overnight, you're going to be looking at 20 hours for that minimum. If that's not going to work for you and you want to do some opportunity charging where it's on a lunch break, you want to load and unload, you're going to want something a little faster than that. So those are sort of the things you need to consider. Then when we're looking at here is the differences between prices, infrastructure. So these first ones, going to be a little less infrastructure, a little less power needs to go into them. Once you get to the 180, you're talking some dollars, right? So you got to think for different infrastructure, how much trenching is going to need to be done? How far away is the unit from my power source? Multiple things that I'll talk about a little bit later, but we work with someone to make sure that we're helping you out with that infrastructure and the questions. Again, some class 8 charge times, just so you can see the differences between all the models. And then as well, like we talked about the dual truck charging and which ones offer that and which ones don't. So just really depends on your use case. So this is a graph that I like to show. It's really comparing an average household to the energy and power it takes to charge these trucks. It's a lot. You're talking 11 times the energy, 33 times the power. This is a big job to get a charger in there, to be able to get the infrastructure and the power at your guys' location to be able to do this. So what we do at PACCAR Parts is we team up with NTech Solutions, and they're going to help you out with site assessments. They're going to be able to help you out with putting these chargers in. So kind of what Matt was talking about, we're a full solution offering that we're really communicating to everyone to help you out and make sure from the truck to the charger to the infrastructure to the grants and incentives, we're helping you out along the way. So this is a really good graph as well. Like we were talking about, this isn't going to happen overnight. This is a really lengthy process. It's kind of like a puzzle where you're thinking about, when am I going to get my truck? When am I going to get my charger? How long is infrastructure going to take? Matt kind of alluded to it earlier, but we're seeing it's taking over a year to get infrastructure. That's really where our bottleneck is right now. For the ABB charger, so those are going to be the standalone units, we're looking at 16-week lead time, whereas the mobile units, the Heliox ones, those are around 12. So really depending on how much work needs to be done for the infrastructure, the more that needs to be done, the longer that lead time is. So this is really something that once you start figuring out what truck you want, we really need to get on the ball, talk to your electric company, and also to be able to get that construction started and that site assessment. And with that, I'm going to hand it back over to Matt. Thank you.
All right, I'm going to try and wrap this up. I haven't seen anybody get too droopy-eyed out there yet, but we got one. No.
Kind of gives a roundabout price increase on the charging stations, like dollar signs. What are we looking at here?
Yeah, great question. That's exactly where I was headed. So total cost of ownership is kind of the last big topic I wanted to hit. If you haven't already heard, EVs are expensive, and the charging is too. And so that's a barrier to considering these vehicles. And so really the trade-off is in total cost of ownership. So just to say it super simply, an EV truck is an expensive truck with cheap fuel, and a diesel truck is a cheap truck with expensive fuel. And so just to give you some kind of rough idea numbers, I usually tell folks the truck is likely to be around 3 times as expensive as a similar diesel vehicle that you would purchase. That can be bought down by the grants, so 150K a truck in California. And then in the state of Oregon or Washington, usually it's going to be a diesel emissions grant. And that usually is on the order of about 45% of the cost of the vehicle. And so both of those programs can help a lot with that upfront cost of the vehicle. The second thing on the chargers, again, just to give you some rough idea range numbers, if you're in the class 6, 7 space and you can use a class 2 or AC charger, that's the cheap charging basically. You're talking a couple of $1,000s for the charger and another couple of $1,000s to put it in. Usually all in you should be 10K or less, just rough idea. For a truck, for a charger, that's a little one. That's in the realm of what you would use for a car. If you're talking a big truck like a 579 and you want to charge it fast, it's much more expensive. And so usually the ballpark number I give folks is to figure on around $100,000 per vehicle for the charging. And so that can be more and that can be less. The charger itself isn't the only component there. The bigger component is getting the electricity to the charger. And so again, it can be more and it can be less. So if you were, say, a reefer warehouse, you've probably got a ton of electricity already on hand to run all your refrigeration units. And those guys may be able to just run a wire and a circuit off of the power they've already got coming in and add a charger relatively cheaply. On the other end of the spectrum, we had a customer down in the Dallas area that was operating out of an old rail house. And I'm pretty sure they put in their electrical infrastructure about the same time as Edison was inventing this stuff. I mean, it was old. And so our electrical contractor went in there and looked at it and said, we would recommend you not touch any of this because you'll have to redo it all and it will be very expensive. And so they literally just brought in a separate power line and just didn't touch any of the existing infrastructure to try to stay away from the costs there. And so I gathered that all those numbers were bigger than maybe you had realized. And so that's a challenge for EVs. The pro is the electricity. And in particular, for you guys in this area, electricity is very inexpensive as compared to diesel fuel. And so that's the biggest pro. I'll show you a number on that just here in a moment.
What's the longevity of the batteries? Like, is it measured in miles? Is it measured in charging time? And how long do they last?
Good question. So the question was, how long do the batteries last if the truck's this expensive, basically? So batteries in your cell phone, in EV car, in a big truck, all of us, we're using a lithium-ion battery. You probably knew that already. There's many different types of lithium-ion battery, which you may not know. And so each of those different types have different pros and cons, strengths and weaknesses. If there was one like super great kind that did everything perfect, we'd all be using that. Unfortunately, all of them, like I said, have kind of pros and cons. And so in alignment with our kind of brand tenets, our strategy in the trucking world, we want to deliver a really long life vehicle that'll last you for a really long time and give you a good, durable, low cost of ownership vehicle. And so because of that, the battery technology that we're using in these trucks is LFP or lithium iron phosphate. And so to explain how batteries work, basically a charge cycle is filling it all the way up, draining it all the way back down and filling it back up. And any lithium ion battery, you can do that a certain number of times and eventually it's worn out. And so with an LFP or lithium iron phosphate battery, we expect that lifetime to be 4,000 charge cycles or more. And so to give you some quick math, if you think of it this way, say I'm going to use a truck 250 days a year, I'm going to totally discharge it and recharge it every time. I use it for a decade, you're at 2,500 cycles. I use it for 15 years, you're at 3,750. And so we would expect for the battery to last for as long as the vehicle is expected to last if it's a diesel truck, roughly. That's the answer for lifetime. One other thing to note is as you start to investigate this technology, be it a car or a truck or anywhere else, that's not the same chemistry that everyone's using. There's another chemistry or two that are used fairly commonly in the industry, especially in the car space, called NMC or NCA, nickel-based chemistries. The pro of those chemistries is they can store a little more energy for a given size or weight. But the con is those don't last near as long. And so it's typical for those chemistries to last 1,000 to 2,000 charge cycles. And so our trucks have a 5-year battery warranty. And as I said, we'd expect for the life of the truck in terms of the battery last, how long it'll last. Some of the competitors are using nickel-based batteries. And I would be surprised if you could run those trucks for the same period of time as ours before you need to look at a battery replacement. The next question you're probably going to ask is, what does it cost to replace it after replace it?
Well, no, where's the mileage and all that ratios and figuring and charging? I mean, what are we looking at? We gonna get 500,000 miles out of it? Or?
Yeah, so basically range times cycles would give you a lifetime. I don't know if I know that one right off the top of my head, but say 150 miles times 4,000, whatever that is. Thank you. I'm an engineer, so I can only do math with a calculator.
So many fleets operate lift gates. What's the lift gate going to do, and how is that going to impact?
The question was about a lift gate and like a medium duty application primarily probably, but this would be true for either. Your lift gate is still going to run on low voltage electricity like the batteries that start your diesel truck. And so you'll wire your lift gate to that. All the energy in the truck is stored in the high voltage batteries, which are around 600 volts. And so the truck has a DC-DC converter that steps high voltage down to low voltage for your cab electronics or a lift gate. That's a pretty powerful converter. It's kind of roughly equivalent to like having a 300 amp alternator on a diesel truck. And so as long as your vehicle is on and running, you'll have plenty of power to do lift gates or anything like that. The one thing that's a little different is generally a diesel truck's going to have 3 or 4 starting batteries, whereas on the EVs, we've got 1 or 2. And so if your normal operation is to pull up somewhere, shut the truck off and go run your lift gate a handful of times and then come back, keep in mind the battery you're running that from is smaller than on a diesel truck. So in general, it would be better if you just leave your vehicle running or on, and then that DC-DC converter is always live and you can do as many lift gate cycles as you want without having to worry about running down that low voltage battery.
So it does recharge the battery?
Yes. So I'm going to try and wrap it up here and then we can circle back for other questions. But so TCO, like I said, in short, truck's expensive, electricity is cheap, and that helps make the overall cost of ownership come together. So there's a TCO calculator on peterbilt.com you can use to do this math for yourself. You go there, enter in your parameters for mileage, electricity cost, etc., and that'll spit you out a nice easy dollar cost per mile comparison. The biggest factor, as I said, is upfront cost of the vehicle is much more for EV and less for diesel. The biggest factor in favor of EV is electricity costs. That's in particular good in your area of the world here. You guys have really inexpensive electricity because you have a lot of hydropower. And so just as an example, if you're spending about $5 a gallon for diesel fuel and you're driving around 150 miles, you might expect to spend a little over $100 on diesel. If you're doing that same thing with electricity, you're talking 30, 40 bucks. And so roughly a third to a half in terms of energy cost over the life of the vehicle as compared to diesel. And so that significantly more truck price is made up for over the life of the vehicle and significantly lower energy costs. That's the biggest pro for the EVs in terms of total cost of ownership.
Are you figuring today's cost of electricity or what it's gonna cost after we get the infrastructure in?
It's a good question. Let me just put that on our Q&A topic list and we'll come back to it. So wrapping up here, this is just a snapshot of some of the vehicles we either have in process or deployed and out running. This is growing rapidly. And so, like I said, my advice to you is as you look at trying to adopt this technology, the best thing is to start now and to get a pilot going, get a couple trucks running, and that'll help you be able to answer these questions for yourself, for your application. Everything in trucking is different depending on what you're doing with the vehicles. Lastly, let us help you. We've been spending a lot of time working on this and thinking about this. There's a lot to think about, and so that's what we're here for. Let us know how we can help. We do have some vehicles that are coming, demo vehicles. And so if you'd be interested in running one of those, let us know and we'll try to work with that and set up schedules so we can get up here and help you experience the vehicle. This is the EV team. let us know how we can help.
All right, so we've got about 30 minutes left. I'm gonna give you a little Cummins update. First of all, want to thank Keith for having us here. This has been a good event and just really appreciate being here. Partnership with Peterbilt is great, you know, work with Stephen all the time. So it's a good thing. I just want you guys to know that, you know, we have a good relationship, work well together. It's a good partnership. I just want to introduce the Cummins folks to you. So right beside me, I have David King. He is our product management, product strategy leader. I have Ron Dimmick. He is one of our sales reps for this region. Trevin Fountain in the back. He's probably the guy you know the best. He's has this zone in Oregon, this territory. And then his boss, Scott Rulin, who's our director for the West. And then my name is Ben Slayton. I'm the account manager for Peterbilt from Cummins. So pretty much, if you're not getting what you want, you can ask me as another option. But I think in general, I work with the factory mostly. Okay. One thing I wanted to mention, when Stephen kind of went through the scenario with the Cummins limited volume, those caps, that kind of thing, there's two scenarios that could play out. Like we we're saying, it's confusing. The CARB EPA, the CARB ruling hasn't been finally made yet. And so we have a couple scenarios that could happen. The one scenario that Stephen has is how it stands today. That's plain to record. We have some limited volumes in Oregon and California in 24. The other side of the coin, you know, is the potential that this CARB waiver could be, you know, likely granted by the EPA. So the EPA is going to say, fine, CARB, yeah, we will grant you the waiver. But then as soon as that happens, there could be a legal injunction, a legal challenge by, let's say, some state attorneys generals. And so it'd go to the district court of Washington, D.C., and then it'd have to be a period of like 60 days where there could be public comment and, you know, they say, hey, I object to this. And the objection is basically that CARB did not give engine manufacturers, truck manufacturers 4 years to implement it. And so we've seen this in the past where, you know, if you have a rushed implementation, it's not as good for everyone. And so we're kind of, everyone is saying we need 4 years to implement. And so the timing of this is we think that February will be when, so next month will likely be when the ruling, so CARB's waiver would be ruled on by the EPA. And then after that, the 60 days for the comments. So that puts you in end of April. And then from there, it could be like Q3 when we finally know. So Q3 of 23, when we finally know whether or not what we're going to sell. So it's kind of uncertain times. But I think, you know, we have a backup plan. So if Cummins kind of thinks that it's going to get stuck in the courts, and then if it gets stuck in the courts, then we can sell whatever product. We can sell EPA product nationwide. But if it doesn't happen, and, you know, you might be having a lot more MXs to buy in this part of the country, and that's okay too, you know, so it's possible either way it's going to happen, but we have kind of our backup plans. So Dave is going to talk a little bit more in detail about Cummins product plan. And so I'll add in if there's anything I can add in, but he's a technical wizard, so he'll have a good presentation for you.
All right, thanks, Ben. Hey, good. I guess it's afternoon now almost, isn't it? It's still morning. All right, a lot of information today, and Ben may have oversold my technical expertise, but I'll try to explain kind of the Cummins viewpoint on the regulations a bit, and then also how our product plan lines up with that, and so that then therefore what's going to be available to purchase. All right, so, you know, very much, you know, like Stephen said, you know, we've got this EPA, and these slides might be hard to see if you're in the very back of the room or if you're online. So this presentation material will be available later. I think that's actually one of the questions, was looking at some of your all's questions. So do put your questions in, it's great. Because actually was getting one of the answers pulled up for later on when we do that Q&A. So EPA, today's emission levels carry on until 2027. So the EPA just finalized their regulations for 2027 at the end of December. So that gets the 4-year requirement checked box, and you can see the reduction in emissions is pretty hefty, from 0.2 gram NOx, that's how we look at this, to 0.035. So that's a pretty significant reduction. And even more, probably more importantly, is a much longer emission useful life EUL and a longer emission warranty. So that means we have to ensure the engine stays compliant to that emission level for a much longer time, because that's really important. So the CARB, the other part of that is the EPA, then that's their one step, and then they're kind of done from a criterion emissions perspective, which is good because that gives us some stability in what our product needs to look like and do. CARB has this CARB 24, right? California is the only state that can create its own emission regulations. That's part of the Clean Air Act, but they have to give 4 years notification, just like EPA, to give us time to develop products to then meet that. So we're coming up on this CARB 24 that we were just talking about for a while, and that's a step down from 0.2 to 0.05, so 75% emission reduction, pretty stringent. And the emission useful life that Steve talked about. So as Ben said, the waiver, which is EPA saying, yes, CARB, you can continue to implement what you proposed. So waivers approved, that means they get to continue. If it's denied, they don't get to execute it. And Ben talked through kind of the view of likely the EPA would approve it, even though under a legal perspective, CARB would not give those 4 years that are required. So then there's a 60-day period to comment and go under a legal challenge, and then it would go to the district court. So all that's going to happen, and we're looking forward to watching how that plays out, of course. So then, no matter what happens there, CARB 2027 comes, and that's an even further reduction. And you see what happens is we still are not in alignment of EPA and CARB in 2027. We continue to work with both CARB and EPA to support any potential possibility of alignment of those emission regulations. We think that's best for our industry, and so we are very supportive of anything we can do to help make that happen. But it's not the way it is right now. So that's the way it is. Medium duty is the same thing, criteria, but the useful life is just not as long. So I won't dwell on this slide, but just know that, as we talked earlier, it's a heavy duty and medium duty situation on the emissions. And I really like Peterbilt's graphical or map version of this. We have this sort of tabular version, or it's a watch list of states that are going to be CARB states. And of course, we've talked about how Oregon is now part of CARB. They've adopted it. States have to give 2 years notification that they're going to adopt the CARB regulations. So you see states say they're going to do it, then they back out. Pennsylvania is kind of an example of that. So blue in this list means that they've adopted it or very close to adopting it. So you can see Massachusetts comes on in 25, and then Washington in 26, and New York, Vermont. So, and then you get up to 27, and more states are possible. And so the CARB has the potential to continue to cover more and more of the country. So come back to what's really important right now is next year. Well, 11 months and 5 days. Yeah. Make sure I remember that right. So what are you going to be able to buy from Cummins, from a Cummins engine perspective? So EPA, this is this top row of our portfolio. Our portfolio today is our B6.7, our B6.7N, that's the natural gas version of that engine. L9, L9N, natural gas. You get the formula, right? ISX12N, natural gas, 12 liter, the 15 liter diesel, 12 liter diesel, and then the X15N, which is sitting over there in the corner. There's a prototype engine right there. So a new natural gas engine, and Steve had that in his product plan as well. That'll come out in 2024. All of those products will be available in EPA's non-CARB states. Maybe that's a better way to say it. Non-CARB states. So they'll, pretty much stay as is for the most part. And so those will be fully available, and they'll be able to get clean idle stickers to run into CARB states, but you have to have the CARB emission warranty added on top of the engine. So that'll be a requirement, but if you don't register in a CARB state, and you register outside, so state registration, plate in the truck, you can run into California, you can idle unlimited with a CARB clean idle sticker, you can run out. For states that aren't CARB states, but look for clean idle, there's a provision in that EPA regulation that is an EPA clean idle sticker. So that has some definition that still needs to happen since they've just finalized it in December. But that sticker will become a new sticker available so that you can have clean idle in EPA states or non-CARB states. Now we come to CARB. So if CARB 24 is enforced, means waiver approved and the courts don't stand in the way. If the court could put a stay and could delay it a year, they put a stay and do a model year. But let's say it's enforced, then how will Cummins products be available? So first of all, natural gas, the new X15N, the L9N will both be available. The L9N, the natural gas 9 liter, is today certified to CARB 2024. It's the first and only engine certified to CARB 2024. Just like to point that out. But as Steve also talked about, is our B6.7N and our ISX12N will not be CARB compliant or certified. So they'll be non-CARB state only or EPA only. Our B6.7, L9, X12, and X15 will be available under the provisions that Steve talked about as well. So we've got the high horsepower exemption, so 5.25 horsepower and above, we'll be able to sell under that exemption. There's also the legacy engine provision. So we register engines under that legacy provision that allows us to sell the EPA hardware engine under into CARB states or into California and Oregon. And so, but then we are limited on volumes. And there's a bunch of formulas for that. And we're working with Peterbilt on what that is, but it's mathematical based on historical numbers and things like that. But so each of those engines, you see this yellow exclamation mark, those will be available. They'll be like the engines you buy in EPA, but they'll be sold in limited quantities under the Legacy Provision Act. So the way we see it as we look forward to going in for these new emissions, the things we look for as we look at our product plan is the sustainability, right? So how do we make engines more, for our sustainability of our environment. So meeting the emission regulations, meeting them early if we can, and that is our plan. So in 2026, we will bring 2027 EPA emission regulation engines to the market. It'll be our whole new global platforms for our engines, and you'll see that here in a few minutes. Longevity and opportunity, all very important. Again, all, part of our whole product plan going forward. So from a heavy duty product plan perspective, just to kind of put it a little bit more visually, this year we have our X15 diesel, X12 diesel, ISX12 and natural gas available both US or EPA and CARB. In 24 and 25, the only 2 years that legacy provision exists, we will then sell that EPA product, hence that's the gray, that's why it turned from green to gray. It's an EPA product that we will sell in limited volumes in the CARB states. And each state has a different quantity allowed. So I talked about this complicated mathematical formula is the bucket or the number of engines we could sell for California as CARB is a separate bucket of engines than what goes into Oregon. And then as other states sign on, each of them are taking on that responsibility. So you can see that all happens on the 15, the 12, the ISX12N becomes EPA only. We carry that product through 26. And then in 26, you see the X15N comes in 24, and that'll carry us through as a platform going forward in natural gas for heavy duty. The X15 diesel, we bring our next generation platform in. And it's actually this platform that you see over here in the corner. It's a new global platform at 15 liters. We'll launch it in natural gas first in 24. We'll then bring the diesel version of that same platform. So if you've seen any of our fuel agnostic information, same common head, kind of head deck, common block from the head deck down, commonality. They're very familiar. Head up, it's all fuel specific. And so from a fuel specific standpoint, we'll have natural gas, we'll have a diesel version, and then we'll bring a hydrogen version in 27. That engine that meets the EPA and CARB in 26, then only meets EPA in 27 because remember CARB gets more strict. And we'll then take that same platform, apply additional technology to make it CARB 2027. But head deck and down, this is one product. Head deck up, it varies by the technology required for the combustion, whether it's natural gas, diesel, hydrogen. Similar story on our L platform. So we will use the legacy provision to continue to have the L9 available in our CARB states, hard not to say California. L9N will continue. Probably used to seeing that in refuse trucks and such. Then come in 26, we'll launch a new 10-liter platform. And you'll see a public announcement about that later, probably next month. But we'll bring a 10-liter product to the market to then be on a new platform, to then be CARB and EPA certified in 2026. In 27, it becomes an EPA product. And we add technology to get down to that very low CARB 2027 standard. And we bring a 10-liter natural gas version of that engine. Again, common platform, fuel agnostic platform, as we say, multiple fuel capability. B platform, very similar story. Probably getting used to that. Current diesel platform, natural gas, both EPA and CARB. In 24, the diesel engine uses the legacy provision. to continue to give you the familiar product for 24, 25, 26. The natural gas engine becomes EPA only. Next generation platform for RV. We launch in 2025 what we call octane, fancy word for gasoline, right? So it'll be a heavy duty gasoline engine. The simplicity of gasoline with the durability and the performance of diesel engines. And we'll then launch a propane version of that engine later in 2025, all on this new platform. In 2027, we bring an EPA diesel version of that engine to the market. And that engine will be at 7.2 liters instead of 6.7. So this is all, again, new global platform, fuel agnostic platform. So how am I doing on time? Got a few minutes?
Couple minutes.
Okay, real quick. I'm sorry, I was looking for it. So I'll take just 2 minutes and talk about X15N. What Ben didn't say when he said I was product strategy and planning is I am particularly responsible for natural gas and alternative fuel engines. So if you get cornered by me later at lunch, I might talk your ear off about natural gas. But we are bringing this engine in the corner, the X15N, to the market in 24 with PACCAR. So it'll be in the Peterbilt product line. It'll be the first big bore dedicated natural gas engine in the marketplace. It's designed for heavy haul, line haul, right? Our other engines have fit into all the various vocational markets. This engine is really targeted at this growing market segment of line haul for natural gas. Capable of 24 and 27 emission levels. 500 horsepower, 1850 foot-pounds. So if you think about X15 efficiency diesel, it matches up with that from a ratings perspective. We'll have all the kind of similar ratings. It's about 500 pounds lighter than today's X15 diesel. So, and that kind of a feature will apply to that whole platform generation, that next generation platform. So we're taking weight out of the engine as we go forward when we bring these new global platforms to market. So uses a passive maintenance-free after-treatment system, much like your passenger car, just a lot bigger. And it'll be produced in Jamestown, New York. And just real quickly, so natural gas, we are going to have the ability to have the same power and the same torque and hold that torque back to the low end like a diesel engine does today. So driver satisfaction with natural gas that they've never had before. For anybody who runs ISX12N, this is a very different type of torque curve. This is a comparison of the 15N and the ISX12N. And you can see a much different kind of drivability experience when you get that. I'm going to pause or stop there because I think we've got probably a lot of questions. And thank you for your time today. Appreciate it. Thanks for coming out and having us.
Thank you. Let's, we have some online questions, and maybe we just invite everybody to stand here for a minute. Jeff, maybe turn the projector off. Where's the microphone? Yeah, let's turn that one off. Yeah. So we've got some online questions. I know there's some questions in the audience as well about, it's a lot of information. I've heard it 3 times this week. We had essentially the same presentation with our sales team Monday. Then we had this meeting Tuesday in Salt Lake City. Then we just did this meeting again. And All 3 meetings, I had to excuse myself to throw up, so. So, why don't we start off? Your computer, oh, there we go. I'm going to start off with this question, then we'll just kind of walk through it. And if you have questions in the audience, please raise your hand and we'll answer them. Where does the EPA and CARB expect the electrical infrastructure to come from? Our electrical infrastructure already struggles to keep up with the demand. Any?
I'll try to take that one. So the question was, where does the government think all this electricity is going to come from, basically? I guess I'll say there are investments in the IRA, the recently passed bill, that are intended to incent EV adoption, as well as try to help modernize the power grid. If you talk to any of the utilities in this part of the world where this is being pushed most heavily, they're trying to do a lot of proactive thinking on their parts as well. So like if you talk to somebody, especially in California, like at SCE or PGE, they're making 5 and 10-year projections about where they think power demands are going to be. There's a big focus on like electrifying the ports in Southern California, for example. And so they're saying, how many trucks is that? How many miles is that? How many kilowatt hours is that? How much power do we need there now that we don't have? And that same thought process is happening, especially out here, anywhere on the West Coast where this is being pushed. So I don't want to say, don't worry, it's going to be no issue, everything's handled. I'm sure there's going to be bumps along the way. I know there's a lot that needs to be done, but it is being worked on and thought about. And so I think it's going to get there. And the other thing to keep in mind, no one's saying this, but let's just say we weren't going to build a single combustion engine vehicle of any type starting right now today. At that pace, it would still take us 10, 20 years to get to nothing but EVs on the road. That's a long time to build a lot of power grid. And so it's going to take time for this to take hold, just like it took time for air conditioning or anything else. And so it'll happen over time. And I think that's kind of the best answer I can give.
Thank you. All right, what changes occur from the current after treatment diesel technology to make them cleaner, assuming that's coming from 2024 and 27?
Yeah, so the, is this, can you guys hear me in the back?
Yeah, you're on.
Can't hear myself back there. So there's 2 ways to reduce NOx, and both of them include adding heat. You can either dump a whole bunch of fuel into the after treatment and burn it really hot, or you can add a grid heater. So we will be adding a grid heater to the MX. There'll be power generation on the engine to power that grid heater. It'll be dedicated power generation to keep the after treatment hot. And I would expect everybody that does this into 27 will be using a similar type solution. PACCAR will just be the first.
From a Cummins perspective, our 2024 engines will have the same after treatment for EPA and CARB. And what we'll do is we'll lengthen that after treatment system on the X15 for a reduced back pressure, more efficient, but we're not adding the grid heater then. When you come to that 2026, I think that's exactly right. You need more heat and heat through a wider range of the duty cycle to hit all the different corners of conditions. And so then you have to have more heat and heat at various times. So grid heating is going to be really important.
I guess I completely agree, with one exception. The 24 engines, and you talk about having the same after treatment between EPA and CARB, right, are not going to be fully CARB compliant, reduce the emissions. There's no plan to do that, right? So I just don't want to instill confusion of, well, why is PACCAR adding all these components and heater and all this stuff, but Cummins doesn't have to do it. And it's because the Cummins engines, and hence the limited availability, are not going to be reducing emissions above and beyond EPA to meet the CARB requirements.
We'll be using that legacy provision and the exemption.
All right, somebody put a question online. Is the presentation going to be saved and distributed? The answer is yes. The reporting and the presentations that these guys all did are going to be saved and uploaded to a website. We will distribute those to everybody that wants them. what comparable fuel mileage of a 6.7 octane engine, what is the comparable fuel mileage of a 6.7 octane to a 6.7 diesel?
I should probably take that one. So, the gasoline cycle is a less efficient cycle than diesel. That's why diesel has become such ubiquitous. But we would expect between the efficiency difference between diesel and gasoline engine cycle and the lower density of fuel of gasoline to diesel, that the octane engine will have about a 25% less fuel economy than the diesel engine, but about 10% better than today's gasoline engines that that are in the marketplace today. And we're doing that with technologies like direct injection, Miller cycle, and such for the engine technology to really have the highest efficiency engine in place, turbocharged, but it is a less dense energy fuel.
The next question that was in the Q&A list here was about quick swap batteries or faster charging to enable more range. So just speaking broadly, in some of the real light vehicles, I've seen some what look like good strategies on quick change batteries, like a little motorcycle or something like that. Anything much bigger than that, the battery really begins to become a structural component. There's liquid cooling. There's many and multiple high voltage electrical lines. They're located all throughout the truck. Our 579 EV, for example, has batteries left-hand rail, right-hand rail, between the rails, basically everywhere we can stack a battery between the front axle and the back axle. And so the batteries really become a very heavily integrated into the design of the vehicle. And so at least so far in the heavy duty truck space, I've not seen a swappable battery that's all that practical. The other challenge is, just to use an analogy, if you go get a new propane tank for your grill, you just take your old empty one and you swap it with a new one. But sometimes you bring it back and you get this dinged up, ragged out, dented, rusty container, right? Well, if you think about batteries, the battery is the most expensive component on the truck. And so you don't really want to take your nice new brand new battery and swap it out for a ragged out one, right? And so because of that, who gets the good battery, who gets the bad battery, and that ownership problem, that's another thing that I think is going to be kind of a barrier to swappable batteries.
Okay, thank you. Talk changes. What are changes on the MX-13 and X-15 for EPA engines? And the same thing on CARB. I assume that's in 2024.
So really the only, and David touched on this just a second ago, the only changes for EPA engines is a slightly longer after treatment to improve reliability at end of life. That is, in essence, the only change that is happening. And of course, we talked about CARB engines. Cummins engines are going to be EPA engine certified for legacy engine provisions, and the MX engine will be modified to meet the full regulations.
All right, another one. What range can I expect from the new CNG engine, and how heavy is the engine? I'm sure that's the X-15N. Range and weight.
So the X-15N is, so a CNG vehicle, usually you add the fuel delivery system on the back. The vehicle gets about 2,000 pounds of fuel delivery system on it. If you have for about 175 diesel gallons. We're taking 500 pounds out of the engine. So, in net, you'll be about 1,500 pounds heavier, but just like with a battery electric vehicle, you get that 2,000 pound exemption. So you can run up to 82,000 pounds spread out over the axles. From a range perspective, you can expect with 175 diesel gallon equivalent on the back of the cab, you can get probably 800 plus miles range with that fuel system. You can add more fuel, but more fuel is more cost. So you have to look at that. There are trucks out there with over 1,200 mile range CNG, but more typically 130 to 175. Yes.
That natural gas can go over 82,000.
Yes, you can. We don't have any weight restrictions on the X-15N. We do on the ISX-12N today, for people who are familiar with that.
Good question.
So just real quick on the clarity, the 2,000 pounds is a federal, it's a overweight allowance to account for the increased weight of the better fuel, emissions fuel. It's not like a limitation on the product itself. So you can have up to 82K without having an overweight permit on the 80K limit.
Yeah, I took it as we have weight limitations on our.
No.
gas
Yeah,
station, So that's how I.
The next question, maybe I'll try to hit 2 for 1 since we're starting to run out of time. One question was, what about like Class 8 straight trucks, like 567 vocational space? Do we have a solution for that? Right now, not quite yet, other than the 520. But we have things in the works. And so right now, as we speak, PACCAR has about $500 million worth of programs going to enhance range, enhance charge speeds, broader model availability, et cetera, et cetera. We have a lot going on this space. And so one of the reasons why I was saying to you all, start now, is we all have a baseline and a filter for what to expect with our diesel trucks that we're used to. And you need some of that in this space to be able to expand your operations in this way with the technology changes that are coming. And so I would encourage you to start to learn about this technology so that as it's more broadly applicable, you can adopt it as well. I think there's one other one that was in that same vein.
Is Jennifer single is the question. Just popped up here.
Another Jennifer question was if the PACCAR charger lineup is registered for the local utility. Do you know the answer to that one?
Say that again.
The local utility has a program for like charge ready kind of, but in Oregon area. Do you know if we're on that list? I know we are in some of the California programs like SCE Charge Ready, and PGE has a similar one with I think a different name. I'll have to double check in Oregon if we're registered with the utility, but I would expect we probably are.
Matt had mentioned something about getting started. So I just wanted to mention this. We've mentioned several times today, Advanced Clean Fleet, which is not regulation yet. There are open public calls on that. So there's a meeting coming up in February. They'll kind of display to everybody, and then they're required to take all the comments that come in. So I would just encourage everybody, either in your state as that comes up, or California, if you want to call into their call, listen to what's going on, see what their plan is. And if you have an opinion one way or another, make that heard. Because the OEs say stuff and people who support CARB say stuff, but the best person they could hear is people who actually run trucks say either, hey, you're right on, that's great, or there's some things you're not thinking about, let me tell you about them. So I was just asking, please participate in those and just make your voice heard one way or another, however you feel about it.
Okay, we're getting a couple of punchy questions in here. The funny one is, will there be an EV delete kit? So yeah, apparently there will be.
In all seriousness, I would say I was a little bit of an EV skeptic not too long ago. I think if you try one, you'll find that there's things to like about it. Another thing I'll say is, as you're kind of gathering from the conversation, this isn't easy and it won't be. If there was a technology solution that let us do everything a diesel truck does with no compromises, we would all be bringing that to market. And there is no such thing. And so right now, EV technology is the best solution to moving goods like we're all used to doing with zero emissions. And so we're trying to make that as fast and light and powerful and cheap and everything as we can, but it's just not going to be something that can be done with no compromises. And so really, like I said, my goal here today is to help you guys understand the technology, what it can do best, and maybe what some of its shortcomings are as well, to help you think about how to integrate that into your operations. And so no EV delete kit, but they're faster and more powerful than diesel. That's a pro. There's electricity is cheap compared to diesel. That's a pro. And so there are drawbacks, but there are pros as well.
You ever heard
Okay.
of rubber beats the road?
Yep.
All that power.
So one of the questions in the back I got earlier was a little clarification on registering trucks, DOT versus registering trucks. If somebody purchases a truck in Idaho, but still DOTs it in Oregon, is it gonna have to be CARB compliant?
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. So we always have to give the legalese statement, so I'll give it now, and then all of this is PACCAR's interpretation and Cummins interpretation. That's why we have different interpretations of the regulations. But our interpretation is that it doesn't matter where you buy it, it's all in where you DOT register the truck, right? Not where you operate, right? We have a lot of over-the-road fleets that DOT in Indiana must be the cheapest place to DOT your truck because all of them do it there. And then they run all 50 states. They do not require CARB compliant engines because Indiana doesn't require them. So that's PACCAR's interpretation. Cummins is aligned with that particular interpretation regulation as well. So
Let's read one more, and then we'll see what the audience has to say. Will any of the new CARB engines be able to fit into the car hauler with a head rack?
we are working through that right now. That's what I would say. There's still some potential things that we can do. It's going to be a top fit, right? For any of you guys in here that run car haulers that are super low to the ground and height is a challenge. So at the moment, they are in scope for 24.
Okay, do we have some questions from the audience out here? Yes, sir.
So he mentioned the EV delete program. If the administration changes in this country and the electrical vehicle movement changes and goes a different direction, or if it should fail, what is Cummins and PACCAR and Peterbilt, what is your backup plan if we should steer away from electric vehicles and attempt something else?
I'll try to answer that. The question was basically, you know, what are we doing if regulations change or things change into the future and all that? And so I think what Stephen was going to say is, I don't think any of us have stopped developing and improving our diesel products, and we will continue to do so. And so at this point, that's now and is expected to be into the future continued technology that will rely upon the goods. I don't know if we talked too much about this, but we're looking at hydrogen technologies as well, both at Cummins and at PACCAR. That's a zero emissions technology that is a little bit easier to adapt in terms of duty cycle, similar to diesel. So the ranges are more similar, the refill times are more similar, and so there's talk about that. I do want to caution you though, as I said, there is not a zero emissions technology that's easy and does everything a diesel truck does. And so, for example, if you think EVs are expensive, hydrogen fuel cell trucks are even more expensive. And so the way I generally say it is a diesel truck is a cheap truck with expensive fuel. An EV truck is an expensive truck with cheap fuel. And a hydrogen truck is an expensive truck with expensive fuel. A gallon of diesel and 1 kilogram of hydrogen are about the same energy content. Right now you can buy hydrogen in California at $16. So can you imagine filling your truck with $16 a kilogram of hydrogen? It's cost prohibitive, and that's one of the reasons why that's kind of at the back of the development queue, if you will, in terms of stuff coming to market. And so, like I said, there's solutions out there. This is the direction that I feel pretty confident the world is moving, and why we're investing with $1 billion in this stuff, because this is where we think the world will require us to be. And so our goal is just to try to develop the absolute best technology to move goods within the legal framework that we have to work within. And so that's the long and the short of it.
Yeah. Sorry.
Just real quick, Matt talked about it. We've in essence tripled our vehicle platforms at PACCAR, right? We have zero emissions vehicles and we continue to expand on those. We have EPA engines, we have CARB engines. None of them are the same. Regardless of what happens in a regulatory landscape, we will have a solution for you guys and meet your needs, right? So just want to reiterate that this is going to be a challenge. We're all in this together. It's not any easier for you guys than it is for us and vice versa. But we will have a solution regardless of what happens in a dynamic environment.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, diesel's gonna be around for a long time. I mean, that's obvious, but we're gonna have multiple technologies, which is different than what it's been probably through all of our, well, most of our lifetimes, right? Diesel's everywhere, but there's gonna be electric, there's gonna be natural gas, there's gonna be hydrogen, there's gonna be diesel, right? And it's gonna be a different solution for who you are, what you do, and where, what your availability is. Some places, like, what was it, the ports, electric would be more available. Some places, if you're near a hydrogen hub, hydrogen's gonna be very available. The government's working to help push hydrogen pricing down. They've got a $1 per 1 kilogram in 1 decade. Now, do we think it'll really be $1 a kilogram in 2031? Not sure. But we think it'll be down to $5 out there in about 2030. So lots of change, but everything's going to coexist for a long time.
Okay, yes, sir.
So on the natural gas, how closely tied on the is, in California, they're talking about phasing out natural gas on residential construction, like 2030. How closely tied are those with the trucking to supply, say, California, right? You get a natural gas motor, now all of a sudden you can go get fuel in California. And are those tied together on those phase out?
Natural gas needed to be emission requirements.
No, what he's asking is, they're trying to outlaw natural gas in homes, right?
Right.
Is that gonna happen where you can go buy a natural gas truck? In California, you can't fuel it because they're shut down.
Let's restate that question.
Yeah, so the question is about some of the headlines we had seen about cities, stopping the allowing of putting natural gas heat or anything into new construction, housing or such. And does that impact natural gas vehicles and availability of natural gas? I'd say no. There is some desire to do that, which, by the way, will put more pressure on the electrical grid by everybody having electric heat and electric stoves. But the fueling companies are continuing to invest in natural gas fueling infrastructure across the country. So we don't foresee any slow up of that, and you'll continue to have availability of that. The other thing you'll see is some stuff on air quality in your homes on natural gas, which seems to be controversial, the science behind that. But natural gas vehicles will be here that continue to build out fuel infrastructure for commercial vehicles.
And what about fueling time on a natural gas versus diesel?
Fueling time is very similar to diesel. So you can put 175 diesel gallon equivalent into that system in CNG, which is kind of the majority of trucks. That's about a 15 to 20 minute refuel. So very similar to fueling up diesel.
Questions? Yes, sir.
So you guys got the garbage truck set up, which you are using, PTO services on that truck. What's the difference between that same truck and when you are having to use the garbage, the compactor and everything else?
On an EV?
On an EV. I mean, like how much loss do you have? And even more so, have you tried a mixer yet? I mean, because that's even worse,
The question was kind of around PTO and its impact on vehicle range, essentially, I guess, as I understood it. And so PTO applications do affect your range. Obviously, we're using energy to do something on the truck besides just driving it, and that's going to reduce range. It depends on what you're doing with the PTO and how long you're doing it with and how efficient is basically the 3 variables. And so just to give you an idea in refuse in particular, on the most efficient end of the spectrum, I think it's possible we'll be able to go around 120 miles and 1,100 bends with a really efficient body design. On the other end of the spectrum, if you're, say, dealing with a bodybuilder that's not thinking very proactively about how to work with electricity, I think we could be down around 60 miles and that same number of bends. And so in the least efficient cases, we can be almost half of the truck's energy usage just to run the body. And so I think more and more all the time, the focus in the bodybuilder space will be on how to improve efficiency and improve range. That same thing would apply to mixers. Have done a little bit of looking at mixers. That is a pretty tough application for people in the concrete space. Usually my advice is go try to electrify your inbound bulk commodities. Your Portland or your fly ash, your concrete component or your cement component is actually where I usually advise folks to go first. You can bring that stuff in with a bulk pneumatic tractor and you're blowing that load off for a decent period of time. And while you're doing that, you can do that electrically and charge your truck and then go back out and extend your range. And so in my mind, that's the best place to start in the concrete world. And then maybe your bolts coming in like your sand, your gravel and that kind of stuff. And then probably mixers is the hardest just because of what you mentioned, having to spin the drum.
Okay, I think we're gonna get a sandwich here in a minute. I really like to thank these guys for their time. Thank you guys, all of you. Been very helpful, I think. I'd like to kind of end the open portion with Jackson Group Peterbilt's investment along the lines of what Stephen said here a minute ago. Peterbilt is here to stay. Peterbilt is here to provide solutions. Cummins is as well. They're going about it a little bit different, but they're both here to provide solutions. The government, like them or not, agree with them or not, they've done what they're doing, and we have to live with it. And so we've got to provide solutions. Jackson Group Peterbilt came to town about a year and a half ago now, Curtis, about a year and a half, and we've made significant investments in this market in Southern Washington and Oregon. We've doubled the footprint of our store count here. We're here to help, and we want to provide solutions. Please contact our salespeople. Myself, I'm available all the time. And if we can be a part of what you guys are doing, we want to be a part of the solutions of what's going on. The facts of the matter are, like Matt said here a minute ago, these solutions are very, very complicated and insanely expensive. I realize everything we have said today, rings dollar bells in my mind. I'm sure it does in yours as well. There's nothing here that's cheap. There's nothing here that's easy. And I think we've got the very brightest minds on the planet bringing solutions to the party here. So as we break for lunch, please, all of our salespeople, Jackson Group, all the Cummins people, all the Peterbilt people, we're available to talk individually. Some of the questions that we've got online here, we didn't get to, we will answer them online. And any other questions that come up later, please feel free to reach out to any of us and we'll get answers for you. We're going to end the recording now, and thank everybody online for joining us as well. And get some lunch. Thank you.